Good afternoon, and welcome everyone to Lincoln University, the oldest historically Black degree granting institution in the country. We're so happy that all of you are here in our presence, as well as those of you who are here on Zoom. We're really excited about this afternoon and the conversation that we're going to be having. My name is Dr. Patricia Joseph, and I serve as the Provost Dean of Faculty. We're all gathered here for us to engage in a conversation between Lincoln University and Gratz College. It's going to be a conversation about Black and Jewish identities. Before we get started, I'm going to take a minute and introduce the individuals that you're going to be hearing from. The illustrious individuals that you're all going to be hearing from. We're going to start out with our first panelist, Dr. Zev Eleff, Rabbi Dr. Zev Eleff. He is the 12th president of Gratz College, one of the youngest presidents in American higher education. At 35 years old, he was elected by the College Board of Governors in June of 2021. Eleff was previously the Chief Academic Officer of Hebrew Theological College and Vice Provost for Touro College in Illinois. He is a prolific scholar, the author of not 9, but 11 books, one of which he has graced us with here today. And more than 50 scholarly articles in the field of Jewish studies and American religion. He has been a person who has received many awards. He is an adept administrator, champion of tourism. He received his PhD from Brenda University and his master's from the Teachers College of Columbia. He is the past Wexler graduate and also wanted me to mention his role as a husband and father of 3. So please help me welcome Brenda. And our next presenter is our own Dr. Brenda Allen. She is the 14th president of Lincoln University. She has been aggressively implementing a strategic plan that is designed to ensure Lincoln's place among the great liberal arts institutions. For some of you who have visited the campus today here for the first time or otherwise, Dr. Allen has made progress on extensive renovations, upgrades, and additions to our 422-acre, 56-building campus. Prior to Lincoln University, she served as provost and chancellor for academic affairs at Winston-Salem. She has an illustrious history at institutions such as Brown, Smith College, and also Yale. She received her undergraduate degree from Lincoln University here and her PhD and master's degree from Howard University. Please help me welcome our president, Dr. And our other presenter is Dr. Shelly LaPrince. Dr. Prince serves as a member of the Gratz College Board of Governors. She is the director of healthcare economics at Johns Hopkins Healthcare and adjunct professor at Drexel University in the College of Nursing and Health Profession. She possesses a PhD in organizational management and a master's of health degree in administration. Along with her husband, who we have here today, and her son, she has co-authored a book, A Mother's Desire, a Father's Prayer, and God's Promise. They reside in Berks County, Pennsylvania, and we're looking forward to hearing what Dr. LaPrince has to say here today as well. So please help me welcome. So we're going to have a panel discussion, It's interesting that we're referring to it as a conversation. I'm understanding that this event was born out of a conversation, very brief conversation. And the presenters will be able to tell you a little bit more about that initial conversation. We also have had conversations on Zoom, and now we are going to continue the conversation in a more deliberate kind of way. We're looking forward to it. So as the moderator, I'm going to be posing several questions for the individuals. We're going to take into consideration time. So you'll want to pay attention to my cue when it comes to that, because we have a couple of questions that we want to get to. So for the first question, each presenter will share more about who they are, what brings them to this conversation, and anything they want to add around layers of identity, their individual, institution, and intersections among those various layers of identity. So we're going to start out with that first question, and Dr. Eleff, you get to start.
What brings me to this conversation is last year and a half, I had the pleasure of being president of Gratz College, and I developed a couple of rules of thumb. One is when President Allen, who I consider to be one of the most extraordinary leaders I've encountered in my life, certainly in the last year and a half at Gratz, she's going to invite me to Lincoln, I'm going to come. Of course, the opportunity to talk to Shelly LaPrince, Dr. LaPrince is, as introduced, a member of our board of governors, a leader, and somebody who hopefully I'm excited to learn from, because we talk about multiple identities, we assume binaries. I know it's actually not so. So I'm excited to move on, eventually learn from you, as I do every time we encounter one another. Identity is a strange thing. It's something that we construct for ourselves. It's something that we own. Sometimes, very often, is imposed on us. And it's something that can either be very fluid. We can jump in when during football season. Some of us jump into our Eagles fandom. If you're like me, you jump into your Ravens fandom. It was much better for all of you than it was for me this past year. I see that tongue in cheek, because we summon our identities differently and at different times. I come into this not as a practicing rabbi, but somebody who has been at the ordination, and somebody who helps, along with my wonderful colleagues, to lead Gratz College, which for 130 years has served as one of the most fundamental and paramount schools of Jewish higher learning in North America and the world over. And so I own that Jewish consciousness, that Jewish identity. And Dr. Allen made that in a wonderful program, sponsored, I think, mostly by the ADL and the Information League. And it was supposed to breaking bread, breaking barriers. We found out that it's good to break bread. Not as many barriers as we had thought. For a much larger population, we were at the higher end with some other colleagues. But it was interesting for me to own whiteness as an identity. It was something in which at different times I own it, it's foisted upon me. And other times, somehow I'm put in a position, whether it's in a boardroom, whether it's in negotiating contracts, or in my personal life, is that I can't possibly be both Jewish and white. Or maybe because I'm Jewish, that presupposes that I have to be white. And those are identities that, it's interesting is that I didn't choose those, but I live in certain multiple realities. And to negotiate those identities is something that I admit is a challenge for me. Whether we talk about white privilege, which is absolutely a real thing, my identity as a man, for example, and how those multiple identities interplay with one another. Sometimes one is surrendered for the other. But for me, and I'll close with this, it's a reminder that our identities are really complicated. And it's not just one, it's a lot of different things. As a parent, as a sibling, as a child of other people, race, Jews, Ulysses S. Grant, for example, in 1862, expelled Jews as a class from his military encampment in the Civil War. Is my Jewishness a class distinction? Is it a cultural one? Is it ethnic? Is it religious? The answer is all those things. And so what brings me here is to debunk the idea that identity, and not saying that any of us presuppose that, but in the ecosystem we live in, we very often assume that it's one identity or another. No, to the contrary, it's a mix, it's an alchemy of really complicated identities that we wear and that are imposed on us at various moments in time.
Before we started, this one's on another dead house on Lincoln South there. Thanks for showing up and representing. It's a great, again, I want to, welcome you all to campus. We started this conversation at a table in a project, and I don't even know how I was asked to be a part of the conversation, and it said yes before I realized it was 3 dinners, 3 weeks. Coming from Lincoln, going down to Philly at rush hour. But after the first one, it was really nice to go back because it wasn't just a conversation. As you can see, we have continued our conversation since that table, and I think are in the process of really building friendships. And that, to me, is why I'm here. I have been always interested in how do you build relationships across difference. So I start by saying I'm unapologetically a Black woman. I've never felt that I had to apologize for who I am racially or from a gender standpoint. And I think that is all the result of how I grew up. So I grew up in a predominantly Black environment. I went to Lincoln, I went to Howard. I was celebrated for who I am, encouraged for who I am. Not in spite of how I walked as a Black person or a woman, but basically told that because of that, I had strengths and abilities that were needed in the world. And so when you go out into the world and you've been pumped up that hard about who you are, it's really hard to enter into other environments and people try to tear you down. I learned about racism primarily through books. I didn't encounter it as far as I could understand as much because of the environments of where I was. But when I did leave those environments and got to places like Yale and Smith College and Brown University, I was like, oh, this is what they're talking about, in the book, right? But when you sort of grow up in those environments where you have been nurtured and loved and just, really taught to respect yourself and who you are, it's easier for you to be in environments where often things happen and people definitely try to threaten those identities, right? And so because of that, and I think because of how I engaged in those spaces, a lot of what I ended up doing, besides being a faculty member and administrator, was really trying to build community across difference. And so in all those environments, and eventually they just started paying me because I used to do so much diversity work. They were like, why don't you just take the job? Which I'm glad I did because it pays more than just being a faculty member. But nonetheless, it was really about doing the things that were important to me. And that was engaging people at human level. And the one thing that I found in doing diversity work is that often we try to have these conversations around really stressful times, right? You meet somebody and the first thing you want to talk about is race or religion. Why not talk about family, birthdays, the things that we have in common as human beings. And I think over time, when you build those relationships at those human levels, you get the opportunity to begin to engage in the more difficult conversations, the ones that maybe you and your closest friend may never see eye to eye on because your background, your circumstances, will give you different lenses into seeing that, but you have a relationship in such a way that you can respect that they have a perspective. And I think that that's the best thing that we can do when we try to understand each other, respect who we are, understand that identities are part of humanity, and that it's not our job to be judgmental of the identities that people walk with. But if we understood those, we sort of will also understand perspectives that they may take on different ideas and how those perspectives may be different, but in fact, are perspectives that are the result of the lived experiences of those people. And I think when you just get to that level, it's easier to be in diverse environments, right? Because the bottom line is that you come to just respect people around you for the human beings that they are, and you're not necessarily looking for people who are always thinking like you, looking like you, acting like you, but in fact bring something different and novel to your life. And one of the things I do know as a chief diversity officer, very interested in higher education, is that when you can get to that level and accept that people have different perspectives and opinions and outlooks, that you really can come together and solve novel problems in more creative ways, because you allow the space for individuals to have different takes on what it is you're trying to solve. And when you are open to embracing those perspectives and those opinions, I think the solutions that we have, we're able to come to are so much greater. And there's all kind of data to show that that's exactly how diversity works, but it will only work if you start with respecting perspectives that people bring. So this is an important conversation for me, because it just sort of furthered my personal desire to be in a world where I can embrace all human beings. And I think doing this between Black people and Jewish people, two groups that have worked together in the world, but are also pitted against each other so much, that if we can begin to understand who we are as people and how these identities influence us, we can begin to, I think, be able to shut down the noise when people want to generalize about things on either side. But we're also able to step back and try to understand some human understanding when each of us are grappling with situations that may affect us as people in the identities that we have. Hopefully, all that makes sense. That's what I'm looking at.
That makes a lot of sense, Dr. Allen. And I was brought into this conversation as a board member of Gratz College, also as an African American, but also as a Jewish individual. So talking about those identities and how they're separate, for me, they're combined. Being a person of whole, a Jew of African descent, there's no separation for me. And it was so important that I accepted this invitation, being brought into this conversation by Dr. Eleff and Dr. Allen, just to talk about the mistaken identity or misperception of the Jew of African descent. And a lot of times there's, when you walk into a room, whether you're a room of whites or a room of Blacks, there's the perception that if you're a Christian, if you're a Muslim, even atheist, it's okay. But the moment you say, I'm Jewish, it's like, really? Like how? How are you Black and Jewish, right? So it's just so important that I represent the larger body of Jews of color. There's so many nationalities of Jewish individuals that it's important to be a part of this conversation, bring that into perspective, and as well as create the environment of acceptance, of diversity, and just bringing us all together. Like there's no need at this moment, thinking about even being 60 years past Dr. King's famous I Have a Dream speech, but still feel like we're being judged by the color of our skin. Like that should not exist 60 years later. So being a part of this conversation for me was extremely important to represent my identity as African American as well as a Jewish person.
So following up on the conversation that relates to identity, the next planned question, you have addressed it somewhat, but I'm going to change it up just a little bit. The question has to do with the struggles that you face around each of the layers of identity that you have discussed. And you've also talked a little bit to those struggles. So the change would be, what advice would you offer then to the audience, realizing that we have students and others on Zoom, around facing layers of identity and these struggles and concerns? What advice would you be offering anyone in the audience in that regard as they face any struggles that relate to identity? So,
when I thought about the question, I thought about the mixed bag of the Great Migration. The American population spiked tremendously between the 1880s, so not history, 1880 to 1920. The Jewish population in the United States jumped from 250,000, from 250,000 in 1880 to about 4 million in 1920. And if you look at the newspapers, the Yiddish press in Europe, the American Jewish press in the United States, there were two minds in Yiddish, but you don't have to know much Yiddish to understand this, is some called it the golden Medina, the golden country, where it's an opportunity for Jews or others to prosper, and others called it the Treifin Medina, the opposite of kosher, that it's unfit. That's not a place where Jewish people can thrive and survive. And this country is polarizing. It's to say it kindly. The experience of all peoples has been very, very different. The book that Dr. Allen said, the book I actually wrote it before I came here. It was just a paper supply chain problem, but it will be my last book for a very long time. Thank goodness, the job has been quite busy. But what this is neither a history lesson or a book talk, but the book's about football, happens to be. It's about anti-Semitism and people on the margins in the 1920s. And I want to offer just one insight, is that in the sports pages in the 1930s, most of the All-Americans, by anybody's measure, were not Protestant white. They were Blacks, they were Catholics, they were Jews. Even the most prominent coach at the time, Lou Rockney, converted to Catholicism, most understand secretly at the end of his life. The country, much like football, is powered by people on the margins. This country, the United States' ability to offer up whatever dreams, whatever framework for people to flourish, necessarily has to come from people on the margins influencing the mainstream. That's what I learned from this book, and that's when I struggled. I think my real struggle and whatever guidance I can offer is for complacency. There is a wonderfully rich mission for those of us in any community who see ourselves on the margins, an opportunity to influence the mainstream. That's something I don't take lightly. It's something that I wake up every morning thinking about how I can accomplish a little bit more.
I think I'm going to take just a different take on it and speak a lot about Blackness, and most often the struggles that I see people having with being Black is, is Black one thing, right? Right. So there's this whole idea that in any of these identities, there's some monolithic, quintessential identity for a person. And, in the places where I've been and have encountered, Black people from the diaspora, when you're trying to fit in any one community, there's always this idea that there is a way you have to be. And sadly, for African American people, there's also this sense that there's a way that you should not be if you're going to be in some other environments. So, for example, there's so I'm a psychologist by training. I've studied race and culture, so I'm sorry if I'm making too many research connections, but there's a whole body of literature. There was a concept that was really big in the 1980s called the burden of acting white. And it was a study, an anthropological study done of high achieving African American students and really trying to understand that identity. And one of the things that the study concludes is that for African Americans, if they want to be high achieving, if you want to be in an environment, higher education environment, to excel academically, you have to somehow give up being Black, right? And so what does that mean? You can't dress Black, you can't speak Black, you can't listen to Black music, that you are somehow have to be devoid of any Black culture in order to be accepted in the academic world. So pretty much it says in this dichotomy that you're either smart or you're Black, and that the two don't come together. And so as I've encountered African American students from kindergarten through college, I find many of them struggle with that dichotomy, right? They struggle with where do they fit? Do I, can I be smart and still be considered African American, for example? Or if I want to remain authentically Black, does that mean I can't excel in higher education, right? And, you know, for me, first of all, there's no monolithic way of being Black, right? I think people need to understand that. How we embrace who we are will determine our ability to manage in whatever context that we're in. But if we are socialized to believe that there is something, in this case, that is mutually exclusive about being Black and being smart, that can somehow set individuals up for how they're going to be successful in this world. And so what I try to do is really help them understand that intelligence comes in many different packages, right? Culturally. That if we come to embrace who we are from a cultural standpoint, we will understand that there are many different ways in which people show intelligence. For example, if you look at West African cultures, for example, you know, oral cultures that are not necessarily literal, but there are amazingly insightful, wise people. And these are people that people in villages look to for information. They're not people who have PhDs like us, so the PhD doesn't necessarily give you the monopoly on who has grades, but it's about how people see you culturally. And across different cultures, people see and embrace intelligence from a different perspective. And so I just use that example because in the world of Black and identity and higher ed, because I think is really important in this space, this is one of the biggest struggles for African Americans, right? You know, it's a part of popular culture, right? Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, what was he doing? Running with his books so nobody would beat him up because he was smart, right? We embrace that dichotomy, and we struggle with that dichotomy every day because somehow someone has defined our identity as something being less than intelligent. And I think in order for individuals to embrace who they are, they have to understand that human characteristics manifest themselves across human beings regardless of culture and race. And that when you understand who you are, you understand what you bring to an environment, then you can sort of withstand the ways in which other people try to project their own sort of stereotypical ideas back on you. And again, I say in the African American world, one of those biggest struggles is about who has a monopoly on being smart. And I think it affects how our youth do or do not persist through the educational system. We lose so many people early on because they can't find their identity in that space, or we haven't made space for their identity in those contexts. And I think that that's a huge struggle that we haven't figured out yet in this country.
I would say in a space of being African American as well as being Jewish, there's a lot of challenges that we face. There's, definitely too many to mention in the session, but thinking about what advice would I give? I think my key advice for those in the audience, those on Zoom, those who may watch later, is to really promote and advocate for an environment of diversity and inclusion. So thinking about various challenges that I face from individuals or from various settings for, like I said, for my combined identity, sometimes it comes from the lack of awareness of people's personal identities. So not having that awareness, not putting yourself in the environments to get to know others, cause someone to hurt or harm to other individuals. So I would say the main thing for me is really to focus on diversity and inclusion. Just as an example, like we're here the last day of Black History Month, we're excited just to be here and have this conversation, but also thinking about this month and the exclusion of Black history within our school systems, primarily public school system. It's like, why is there this 1 month out of 12 that we focus on Black history? And a lot of times that history focus on slavery and focus on civil rights, but we've contributed as African Americans so much to society that we should be a part of American history that's mandated within all of the school systems. So my advice is really focus on diversity and inclusion and acceptance. My son is here, he's just had his bar mitzvah. One of the things that we do is really teach him to be proud to be a Black man, be proud to be a Jewish man. There's not a separation, you're a Black Jew. One of the things that we've done is he's been to the Jewish Museum in DC, he's been to the African American Museum, and we really just cultivate that environment where it's okay to accept both. I've been to Israel last year, I went to Yad Vashem, to the Holocaust Museum, I've been to the Israeli-Ethiopian Heritage Center, and there were different experiences. But I was able to emotionally connect to those stories, to the videos, to the retelling of the horrific events that each individual group experienced. And one thing that I was really surprised about, at least at the Ethiopian Heritage Center, is that when the Ethiopians migrated to Israel, they were shocked that there were white Jews. Like, where did these people come from? So it's like the same thing that I experienced, or that a lot of African American experience as far as being Black and Jewish in America, they experience, which goes back to the need to be more diverse, to be more aware of who we are, the various spaces of Judaism, the various spaces of individuals, so there won't be those culture shocks. There's still spaces I go into where there's like this culture shock, like, oh my God, you're Black, you're Jewish, you're here. But how do we get rid of that shock of who we are as a people? But how do we also embrace everyone else? My husband is studying to be an interfaith chaplain. So although he's Jewish, he's Black, he can relate to someone who's Muslim, someone of other descents and other religions. He doesn't have to just practice in that one space. So how can we be open and accepting to everyone? Like, that's really the goal, is how can we be just in all our actions, just in our thoughts, and how can we transfer that into our children? Unfortunately, the older we get, we're stuck in our ways. But we really can focus on the children. Like, how can we help the children to learn and to be open-minded about the people that they're going to embrace? Like, one of the greatest struggles or greatest concerns for me is my children. How are they going to be treated? So as a parent, you want to protect your children from harm, from hurt. You want to be there for every moment to keep them from tears. But unfortunately, you're always concerned about, will my child face racism? Will they be discriminated against in the school system or in the workforce? Will they get equal pay as a man? So all of these things go through your mind, or even my son, he's so excited about, okay, in a few years, I'm getting my driver's license. That is so scary as a mother to think about your Black son with a driver's license in a suburban area, knowing that you're going to have a license, you're going to have insurance. But if you're stopped by police, so now I have to prepare you of how to deal with the police, knowing that there's a large percentage of police that are good. But for the few that are bad, you don't know who you may encounter. So how do I prepare a child for that conversation to have? Okay, well, make sure you do this, or make sure you turn on all your lights, keep your hands up. I should not have to have these conversations. So my advice is to create an environment for our children, a spirit of unity and acceptance for everyone.
Yes. One term that both of you was narrative, and one of the smartest people of our time is Lin-Manuel Miranda, so I'll paraphrase from him, putting ourselves back into the narrative, or as I'm thinking Liza Hampton, how we see our narrative. I remember being a TA at Brenda, which had at the point 40% I believe the population of Jewish, a very small Black population. And I was a teaching fellow for the same Pulitzer Prize historian, David Fisher, taught one section on the American Revolution, and the other one about the Civil War. In the American Revolution one semester, it was an entirely white population. The Civil War was half. I remember thinking there were more African Americans involved in the American Revolution than Jews. How we see ourselves and put ourselves in own certain narratives, how we avoid falling into a certain trap of you have to behave in a certain way, that there are these buckets that you have to fill in order to achieve whatever, however we determine success, is what is fraught about our society. So how the challenge that I'm thinking about is, how do we bust open narratives, and how do we find ourselves into narratives? How do I live in a particular location with a certain socioeconomic framework and deal with the reality of getting pulled over, and what does that look like? That's something that came up actually in our breaking event, the exact same example. How do we create those narratives and how we own the existing ones is a major challenge. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, and resisting allowing people to put you in a box, I think is the biggest part of that struggle. Because often we acquiesce to other people's perceptions, and I think because of that, we miss out on, all the diversity that we have as individuals, right? We are more than the sum total of the things that people see. It's just that race and gender in particular are very visible identities, or very visible characteristics, and then people transpose their beliefs on you about what those characteristics mean from an identity standpoint. And and often they're wrong because not everybody's the same.
Thank you. So you can see we're achieving the goal. This has been really inspirational, and the conversation that we're having is really one that I think is meeting what we're planning to. I'm going to go off script again and just ask all of you, how do you bust open the narrative?
Sure, I guess I can start. I guess with conversations, today, like just be open, just be honest about your experiences, give them recommendations for how we can improve, but also just starting within. So being true, being proud of who you are, at the same time seeking to learn more about others. So just having a conversation is like the main way to get the narrative, to bust the narrative, is owning who you are. Again, teaching your children, your family, all those who you encounter, not being afraid to speak up when something does seem unjust or unfair, just being an advocate for righteousness, being a part of those conversations, and not turning your face when you see something, even if it doesn't really impact you directly, still speaking up, still being a part of those conversations to eventually help somebody else, to get us to that point of, again, embracing, diversity, inclusion, and also equality.
So you said how you bust out the bucket.
Bus opens the carrots.
Just a little quick story. So my nieces were about to get on a plane to fly across country. My niece, 22, young mother, little girl, not quite 2 years old, and some of my white friends took us to the airport to get them loaded, right? So I'm watching this, and the plane is going to be crowded, and I'm watching them, manipulate seats and stuff. Other people were flying with children, and when it actually came time to board the plane, they put the baby in like row 3 and her mother in row 12. Like, why'd you do that, right? So I go to ask the question, and somehow it just turned into something bigger than it should have been, right? Because I watched them do all kinds of things to manipulate seats for other families traveling with their children. But here you have this young Black mother and this young Black baby, and you make no effort at all. And you say, well, maybe when you get on the plane, you'll ask somebody if they can move. And so I raised it. For me, clearly, racial, I'm sorry. That's what I saw, right? And the way they responded back to me, they ended up calling security on me, right? Putting out the airport. Luckily, I'm with my friend Jill, a white lady from Northern England, and she can become my interpreter, right? So sometimes I can say to her, is it me or is it them, right? Because people will put you in a bucket, and sometimes you are not even sure if you should. Like for me, I was like, well, was I really angry? Because they just took that angry Black woman narrative and just imposed it on me, and then called. I'm just asking a question as any person would be concerned about their family, and they just made me something else. And having friends and just people across differences often helps us to check our own reality, right? It helps us to sort of see when someone is imposing a narrative on you. And you can also ask, am I living up to that stereotype? Because sometimes you can. But it's the ability to have these conversations with people who might be able to see things differently. Because in the same friendship group, once we were in a grocery store, and Jill had a daughter. At that point, she was like a teenager, and she was carrying my great niece, little curly hair brown baby. And the way the people looked at her daughter in the store, right? So they see this young white girl, and she has this baby that could be biracial, and just the treatment of it. And we're psychologists, so this is just all research for us, right? But being together and sort of experiencing each other and how people experience us often helped me to actually be really in touch with how people will put you in a bucket and how you might have to resist being put in that bucket. But sometimes I found in our conversations that I would assume stuff, and she would be like, I don't think that's what it was, right? And if you respect them enough and you have that conversation, you'd be like, okay, maybe it's not racial, or maybe it's not about gender or something like that. So again, that's why I think, having diverse friendship groups have really helped me to not only understand more broadly culture, but it has helped me to better understand myself, because you begin to sort of see how other people see you, the positives and the negatives, and the opportunity to be able to sort of break those narratives down, or at least not embrace what people are imposing on you.
I think, I'll use a Hebrew word to translate it. You have to have a lot of kavanah. You have to have a lot of intentionality. We live in a world of silence. I've been saying that a lot this afternoon, in which Facebook, Twitter, Amazon Prime, Pandora, Spotify are all engineered to anticipate your likes and dislikes. It's social media technology's role is to anticipate what you want and to entrench those feelings and those media over and over and over again. To the point where I think it was President Obama who credited Will and Grace with being a major change regime in LGBTQ and gender equality, and being a watershed moment in which, but nowadays, you go find on a Thursday evening 40 million people of all different types of political and racial and gender backgrounds watching Will and Grace. You just don't have it anymore. We all are watching our Facebook reels, our TikToks on demand. And so I would say the greatest challenge we need is to have intention of breaking through and challenging ourselves with the opportunity to think different.
So what kavanah, did I say it correctly? Would Lincoln and Gratz have going forward for any partnership?
I'm
sorry.
sorry.
I'll start with you.
So hopefully there's a lot in the works and a lot to talk about. We are two historical institutions that have thrived by supporting folks on the margin of all types and putting ourselves into the mainstream. And I think our proposition, Shelly, diversity and inclusion, and making sure that we can work together, whether it's in Chester County, whether it's in Greater Philadelphia, internationally. But we're at a particular moment where I think that that Lincoln and Gratz have a lot to teach the world, particularly through the lens of inclusion. And I think as our senior leadership moves forward to use that as our mantra, our kavanah, and a little bit of moxie, just I think those should be our rallying cries, because we have a lot to share and a lot to teach the folks of all types.
I agree. And we've talked about some joint things we can do together. I like that idea we're talking about in the DEI world, just a certification that we could do jointly together. You know, part of, as I truly believe, part of breaking down the divisions is learning about the differences. And part of that is knowing how to be in multicultural, diverse spaces and be comfortable yourself. You know, so often we're in situations where when we are the only one, we are very reticent to engage. And I think one of the best things we can do is to prepare people to be better able to be participants and really understanding what those contexts are like. I remember leaving a Howard, leaving a Lincoln, going to a Yale, being the only Black person in a lot of places, and people reacting to you in that way. Just another quick story, right quick. I used to go to these developmental lunches where they would do these presentations, and they did a presentation one day. It was on child abuse, and the girl was showing these slides, and she basically showed a slide about the number of kids who were showing up at these hospitals who had been abused. And it was like 300 Black kids had been tagged and 20 white children, right? And then she moved on to the next slide about all the horrible things that these kids had encountered. So I asked her to go back because I wanted to know if those absolute numbers, Tiffany knows where I'm going with this, were proportionate, right? Because 300 kids could be 2% of the hospital visits because that hospital served predominantly Black, whereas 20 white children could have been 50% of who was there because the proportions aren't there. So I'm just giving a statistical number. And because of who I am and not asking the question, I swear this girl followed me for like a year. Every time she would see me somewhere on campus, she would keep trying to explain that she wasn't being racist. And I wasn't saying you would be racist. I was saying that your statistics are off, right? So I think, you know, part of ways that helped me to engage in those environments was to be aware of the differences that were around me and have different strategies for managing my ability to be a part. And so I think my credentials that offer people the opportunity to understand diverse contexts, to understand how people are in those contexts and how your behaviors can either make those positive or negative experiences become really important. And I think our two institutions could be really great at doing that. And then we've also just talked about the power of just having the opportunity to have conversations, to tell stories. My mom passed last semester, everything's a semester in October, a little bit after we had our breaking bread. And I got emails from, you know, people at Gratz. They never knew my mother, but through the storyteller, they sort of knew her because that's what I talked about in those circles. In fact, I was just in Baltimore, sitting in the lobby of the hotel. A young man walks past and says, "Dr. Allen." I'm like, well, he was at our table at the breaking bread. And so you can build relationships simply by sharing stories. And we want to look for opportunities to bring our two communities together to share more stories in a very human way.
Yeah, I think they definitely summed it up. I would definitely support any collaboration between the two institutions. As a Gratz board member, I would definitely be in support of bringing Gratz together.
Okay, so we're at time. Can we give our panelists a big